All right, so we were here talking. It's the 10th of or the 8th of October, 2019. Talking through kind of with a couple customers of where they are with the integration. Code has been provided. Bitbucket logins for everybody has been provided, and we've separated out the code because in the previous code we had our own API in it. And now we took the API out, and that's really the difference for the previous repository, the previous instance of what we showed you. So the new one that I just sent over a couple days ago is the one to work off of. Martin is constantly updating the integration. I think we're going to probably slow that update just because it's a pretty mature product. We've been working on this for several years now, so there will be less and less updates. But since you guys are kind of our first set of 4 or 5 customers for this integration or the style of integration, we think this is the best route to go. We've now certified the code with EagleSoft. We've already been certified with Dentrix for many years. I've also got Curve on the line to add us in once their APIs become more readily available. We're also a part of the CareStream developer program. And so their products will come and they'll be included in this integration process as well. So Martin, I'll kind of kick it over to you. You can take over control and share your screen and talk through it with some of these guys and help get them to the next phase of their implementation.
Sure. So, in any case, I'm Martin Gubler. I have been writing the integration here for RecordLink for the past couple of years. And so just trying to give you a quick understanding of what the integration code currently offers and so on. So very first thing you will notice once you download the source code is that you're probably going to run into a couple of errors when you initially get it. And so let me just go and simulate this here real quick. And so what I'm going to do is create a quick temporary folder here and extract those keys and so on. So when you compile the code for the very first time, you're going to get a couple of errors. And these errors are because the source code has dependencies on files that exist outside of the project. And this is so that you guys can update for example, the EagleSoft resource here in order to actually import from a file on that resides outside of the project. This is mostly so that we can have our in-house build of this that allows us to utilize it, but then it allows you guys to come out here to this same folder that you've created your installation on, and you can place your files here. And let me just give you a quick description of each one of these files. So this user key .dtx key file is the Dentrix issued Dentrix key, or as your access key for the Dentrix software. So this contains the list of your credentials and who you are and so on to be able to authenticate properly with Dentrix. The next one here is the create user exe. This is, again, a Dentrix access key. This is for versions of Dentrix prior to G6.2. This was the only method of accessing the database. This is, again, issued by Dentrix. Up above here, I've got the RecordLink code signed PFX. Now, obviously, this is not the name of the certificate file that you guys will use, as you will need to provide your own certificate and certification through Dentrix in order to actually validate that. But this basically signs all the source code between all of your applications, at least in the Syncer project and so on, to make sure that everything is properly signed and recognized. And then Dentrix, the certification process with them is to basically whitelist this certificate so that you can access the API. And then right above that, I've got the password text file. This file is just a file that contains the password for your VFX, so that the automated scripts know how to inject that for the compiler. And then the final one is this EagleSoft Integration Key. and that is, of course, your integration key that is issued by EagleSoft. So as we get more and more integrations here and so on, you may be asked to provide, or rather provide them locally within your machine. The integration keys or components are always going to reside outside of the solution here, such that you can change them on the fly and so on, and it automatically updates everywhere throughout your code. So that's just a very quick thing. So having that all paste back into the directory, we can go ahead and run the source code and let it compile. And here, if we go ahead and watch, we've successfully completed that. And then the next thing I ask is that, again, in any proper development, go in and make sure to execute your test in order to make sure that all of those tests are executing and processing successfully. So once we have wrapped up the integrations here and validated that all of our tests are passing and everything's kosher, we've got the application set up and are ready to actually build a installation or so on for deployment. So when debugging this, there are a couple of shortcuts you'll need. Number one is on the record link executable. So this is the record link sync executable. You can hand it a couple of arguments that tell it how to react. So the -now command basically says perform a sync right now. And that can be run on a client's machine or whatever in order to force a sync in its current state right now. And then if you run it with no parameters, it will actually self-relaunch itself with a -A when it launches under administrator. It's going to self-elevate to administrator, of course with the user's permission. And then once it has done that, then you can actually walk through. And the -A in this is for the activation. And so that is how you're going to initiate the activation process through the plugin process. So with that -A, we can now go ahead and actually step into the source code. But I guess the question is how deep in the actual execution and showing of that do you guys actually want to see, or do you want me to just kind of glaze over it real quick and then give you some details of what data types we sync and so on?
Personally, I don't need you to get deep into this here. I may have questions like as we get into using it. I can't speak for the other people here, obviously, but I'm more interested in like what I'll be interfacing with that this fetches, as opposed to how it works, I guess.
For sure. All right, so relating how it works then, let me just provide a couple of quick details then. So the process within the application here runs, and it is going to request all data of a specific data type. And so there's this enum that we have in the system, resides under common, and this currently lists all of the data types in which we currently support from the various applications. Some applications support most of these, some only support a couple, so it just kind of depends on which product it is. But these are the data types that the overall sync engine currently does provide access to. So we can provide access to the patient information, which is all patient demographics and so on. Services complete and the services incomplete. That's basically your completed procedure work and conditions and things along those lines posted inside of a patient's ledger or the EagleSoft chart. And so that kind of gives you a quick breakdown of that information. Provider, of course, is the provider information within the Dentrix or EagleSoft or enterprise database. These are each one of the dentist or hygienist records that exist within the database. We can gather a significant amount of the appointment information, so we can give you all of the appointments. And the other quick note here is that we will always gather and submit every single record inside of the database. and then it will perform an offset sync or a differential sync from that point forward. There is only a couple of exceptions to that rule where you can override it and say, I need you to reset or something along those lines, but for the most part, we do a full sync and then a differential sync from that point forward. So then, of course, we gather operatories, insurance payments, and so on. If you want the exact list of exactly the data fields we gather and submit, if you go under the record link common and expand the DTO subcategory, there is a list of all the objects. These are the data transfer objects that we actually upload to the web service. So these actually have all the various fields that we upload and the data formats in which they can be expected in. So as you can see here, from an appointment, we gather date, start time, length, operatory, how many ADA codes. These are the specific ADA codes that are referenced in the appointment, as well as any linked treatment plans, and any notes. That in this case, the append note is actually, because we do, at least within the record link system, we do technically allow you the write back of appointments. Now that depends, of course, upon your key and your access level to Dentrix, but that's what this append note is utilized for, as well as original detail. So there's kind of a couple of dual purpose things for incoming and outgoing, but for the most part, this is a pretty linear path as to how all that is processed.
So real quick question here.
Sure.
From your database, can I expect every piece of data to actually have a unique ID that I could update information versus something that is new?
Yeah, so every record in each system has a unique identifier that we can actually key off of, and so that's exactly what this appointment ID is here in the case of appointments. And then like systems like EagleSoft, EagleSoft has a little bit of uniqueness where the user can actually type in their own ID, but we actually serialize that and convert that down to an integer type before returning it to you. So that type is actually, in this case, always converted before returning to you. Let me give you an example here.
I'm actually only asking because the previous system we were working with, most of the time I get something that I could uniquely identify it, but there were other cases where I basically had to refetch everything from them, like the entire data set, because I didn't get unique IDs.
They were using Seeka software, just so you know, Martin. That's the previous product they used.
Yeah. That one. The older version of the record link sync?
No, Seeka. Seeka software, which is a product that doesn't follow the rules of the developer program, things like that. But yeah,
right.
People don't.
Yeah, so I can't exactly speak as to how they gather the information, but my local database in this particular case is just a locally maintained SQLite database, and I require everything to have a unique identifier within the database to be stored. So as far as I'm aware, I have no such existing point where there is not a unique identifier.
Perfect. That's just how it should be.
Yeah, because if it's not unique, it's not an identifier.
Yeah, exactly.
Quick question. Can you walk through a little bit as far as, once that hits our system, we've got a ton of other practices that have similar records in that same table. Can you step through how the syncer associates it with like a unique account on our side, for example?
Yeah, so let me actually go through, and in this case, I'm actually going to go through the activation process, so just make sure that that's configured in the startup params here. And I'm pretty sure I'm pointed at Dentrix right now, so let me just go and run this. So what we're going to see here So what we're going to do is go ahead and execute the registration process here. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and launch the, let's see if the pop-ups are actually showing up here. Okay, so this is the standard process for registering against Dentrix. Let me actually make sure I've got that hooked up properly on the okay, so what we get here, oops, wrong one. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say I want to proceed with this. So this is a Dentrix dialog in this case. So I'm going to authenticate to that, and it's going to register with Dentrix. And so now that the registration with Dentrix has completed, now our next step is to actually register with the web service, right? Who I'm going to be submitting this data to. And so what it is that we do is we obtain the practice information data from the Dentrix database or from EagleSoft Enterprise, etc., right? And so this is going to return me a response of how many practice identities and so on there are recognized within the system. And then what we're going to do is we're going to launch our login service, which is going to basically at this point give me the ability to, in this case, log in. So let me go ahead and log into this. So I got a really interesting email address here. Okay, and so when we actually perform that login, what we're going to get, see if it's coming back right now or if I've lost connection. Actually, I might not be targeted at the QA system, so I might have just sent it to the wrong, or to the production server. There we are. Okay, so this is actually right now how we actually map that. So what happens is that the local application, this is what it says its practice name is. If I had more than one, then more than one would be listed here. And then there is a response that comes back from the web service that says, for your account, these are the unique locations. And so what you do is you choose a location, and then once you've done that, you can go ahead and hit OK. And it will then go ahead and finish that registration process and say, okay, you've registered, right? But if we actually go look at the back end of this, and let's bring up the settings XML here. So inside of our settings file, what we'll see is basically, so right here is our auth token. So right now it just puts in value here because that's what I've told it to respond from the web service. So this could be your actual auth token with the web service. And then the clinic ID is how we actually map which clinic has a specific database of information. And this is a unique key that your web service would respond so that you can uniquely identify all the records of this particular database. So every record that is submitted will have this key on it. And so since this actually could potentially talk to multiple databases locally, every upload record has this key or whichever other key. So you could have 2 or 3 here like this. And we could basically have several different integrations listed here with all different keys. And what would happen is that each one of the records that are uploaded for each one of these different objects would then go and be returned to you, however, in this format, this object, whatever that is to you. Does that make sense?
Yep, crystal clear. Just wanted to be sure we were on track.
Sure. And then the last part here is that the token is actually returned in every header on the, so it's actually returned as the auth token on every single request back to the web service after login. So that way you can make sure that you're only authorizing people who actually have valid tokens back to your web service.
Got it. Good.
And of course, that's any value you want it to be. And we have no limit on the length or anything along those lines for these values. So, okay. So A couple other things maybe to acknowledge here. So number one is inside of our record link common, under the sync helper here. Actually, no, I guess it's right underneath common. It's just this configuration loader. So this configuration loader basically has the settings information inside of it. So what we have here, let me just maximize this here, or make it bigger anyways. So long of short, the path and so on for each one of, for each one of the API endpoints can be configured inside of this file. So if you want to override your base API path and then even the subpath, you can come in here and create override properties for those, in which to basically customize those paths and endpoint names for whatever you need them to be for your products. And this is a list, this is a comprehensive list of all of the endpoints that are currently being submitted and their current values for at least what they are for the record link API. So you can come in here and modify each one of those. One additional note is that the record link logs are automatically encrypted, so there is no PHI released or written to the hard drive in the logging information. However, there is a log decryptor project up here that actually does help you in decrypting those log files to ensure that the information stays local. This is encrypted with an RSA key. However, there's a random ADIT encryption key for each session located locally on the system. So the only thing that's actually encrypted in the actual output is the RSA key, and that is only used to encrypt the AES session key, which it can then be decrypted from this utility, so that you can actually access all that information. So that way you can review the log files and see if there's any problems or otherwise. So I guess the only other thing to mention here is past the DB sync code, there is a separate project for the toolbar or patient submit process. This is just a catered project currently for record link, but the long of this one is basically that Dentrix offers a functionality where you can register to show up inside of the software on what's called the link toolbar. And that's this chain link icon up here at the top. So if I go ahead and choose a patient and click on that, then it will launch the link toolbar. And right now, it has nothing on it because I haven't registered it currently. But if this were to have been registered, then you would have an icon on this bar which when clicked basically launches your executable, in this case, the record link patient submit here just with the program exe. And it will then go ahead and it has a little bit of its own registration process, but it actually can then process that command line, launch a web service, and do whatever you need it to do at that point in order to facilitate gathering patient information and processing that. This is also just another published Dentrix API that you can access. So the very quick information is that Dentrix offers these different structures of information that you can obtain from them. And then you can register yourself to retrieve that information in this DLL, and then you can choose to launch an executable or do whatever it is you want with that information. In this case, I take a basis of that information, and then I launch our executable, in this case, the program CS here, with just a couple of parameters where I extract the patient GUID from that output, and then I access a web page to finish our submission process. And it has some data, additional data gathering and functionality that's built into that as well. So yeah, so that's everything that's currently existing in the code. And of course, we currently offer in the DB Sync access to Dentrix, Dentrix Enterprise, and EagleSoft, and OpenDental is currently in active work. So that one should be coming online shortly as well.
Good deal. I've got a related question to the button, the Dentrix button. Is there a way that we can basically execute a sync from within the web app? Meaning, we'll have it on the regular intervals, but is there a way that we could have an update or sync button within our web application that would trigger or basically force a sync from Dentrix?
Right. So actually, I do. So this is an integration that you guys would have to play with a little bit, probably. But technically speaking, it is built in here, and we have a socket listener process here. And so let me go to this. Right now, we're currently utilizing a technology known as Firebase. And so what you can do is there's again some settings information for this back up here in the configuration loader. And then, no, maybe I didn't leave it in there. Anyway, so I'll find that for you. But in any case, what we have here is a socket listener. And right here, here's the settings. So this is actually where it obtains the information. So what we do is we get the socket URL and path and so on, right? And then we go ahead and plug that into the Firebase online database. And then we listen to messages on the path that we specified. So right here on this path, right? And what will happen is that when an event is published into that object, we get a object notify event. And in this case here, we actually have this objects ready, and that's the only event we're currently listening to. But when we do that, we publish an event listener, in this case, back out to our listener, which is back in our main syncer code. And basically what we do is we've got this process to basically listen to these events, and we'll actually publish and execute our own logic, which will, in this case, download data and or potentially perform a sync or whatever it is you want it to do. So you could issue a real-time response to say, I would like you to perform a sync right now. Or in this case, this is actually publishing data from the web service, but it's still allowing the client to act as a poll. So it's you would post a message in this Firebase client database, and that will fire this objects ready in this case. And then what happens is we immediately send back a response saying, hey, I'm about to respond to this. And then we perform the download of any data from the web service that needs to be processed. And then when that is complete, then we update that status to that the request has been updated. And then, of course, that cycle just repeats and recycles every time after that. So that's kind of at least the architecture that's in place to allow real-time interaction with the service from your side without having to have any direct integration as far as sockets or direct communications outside of that.
Got it. Okay. And so that sounds like it's pretty flexible in that, we wouldn't necessarily have to trigger a sync for all practices. I mean, we could even get granular, like do that.
Yeah, so the syncer in this particular case, the Firebase client, I guess that was the test. So the Firebase file here, let me close this one, actually loads up for each client. So this identifier is the token, or rather the API key or the connector ID that we stored back out in our settings. So it's this settings key here is the same thing we publish, or that's the folder we listen to inside of that Firebase directory. We're only listening to events that are specifically targeted to this database.
Got it. But within that database, like a certain object type too. So it could be, for a very specific patient, even not necessarily all objects. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, the basis is here that you could expound on that. So right now inside of this, the objects ready this is all it currently does is it just issues a dynamic calling from the client to say, go get the information from the server right now because it's available and ready to be written, so that we can, you know, keep the customer not waiting for very long, right?
Okay.
But this could easily be expanded to actually send through payloads of data, or even that all you do is you just say, hey, there's something that needs to be done, or there's a server request, right? And then you could go download from that endpoint with the, you know, identifier for this particular database and download a queue of tasks that need to be performed and then execute those tasks. So it's highly dependent upon whatever you want it to be. It's built to be flexible.
Got it. Very good. And are there any limitations with this with the other softwares, or is this functional for all of them?
So this is functional for all of them. You know, it depends, of course, on what the actual function is you want. So like I said, right now, the current code is issued to only download data that needs to be written into the software. So as of right now, Dentrix is the only one that we actually allow write back on. And specifically in Dentrix, we can write back both patient information as well as we can write back appointments, supposing that, of course, again, your key has access to do so. But EagleSoft actually does have an API for updating the patient information. But Dentrix Enterprise is a little bit finicky on how you have to do theirs, because they have HL7 integrations and so on that may be managing their patient database. And so we have not completed that particular integration point yet. I mean, as we move forward, the goal is to make sure that each of those particular things is supported. And let me actually give you, since we're on that topic real quick, inside of each one of the plugins, there is this get plugin attributes function that should be existing. And basically, this tells you whether or not we support certain features. And so in this particular case, I've got a key for modified timestamp support, save patient support, an appointment right. And so these are just the current keys that we've added. But as we continue to grow this, or as you want to extend additional functionality into these DLLs yourselves, then you can certainly do that and write any associated logic to go along with that. But yeah, that's kind of the quick summary of that.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, I guess I mean, that's all I've got for demo, unless you guys want to see any more. But anything after this, most of this is all headless, so there's no actual, you know, UI or integration other than that initial setup and the installation. So I guess I'll just leave it open to you guys if you have any other follow-up questions.
So Martin, what do we need from them to wrap it up and kind of create and build the actual syncer for you? I mean, I know you have it in a document that you provided. Maybe these guys already know the answer to that based on what you've been talking about, but I just want to be clear as to kind of what the next steps are, because I mean, really this whole code is great. It doesn't do them any good until they have that syncer built to actual customers installing it and using it, right? So I want to get them to that place as fast as possible.
So that said, the setup projects are all included down here in the bottom of the sync project. So once you can actually get all of these projects to compile, and once you've got that complete, then you can actually go ahead and construct an installer right here for this code. So all you have to do is just right-click and build, and then you can actually install or uninstall it from your local box as well for quick integration. And again, this is using, you can see this ... password and the reference to the PFX. That's always jumping out of the project in order to actually perform those. But here we can see that we actually did properly generate that MSI file. And then if I go out to that directory we have here in our release or in our debug, there's your MSI that was recently constructed. So you can then distribute that MSI or whatever as necessary in order to process it. But yeah, that's the only steps that are required to produce an installer to actually deploy this code. The only caveat, of course, is that with any installer project, you may have to upgrade your version. So I usually recommend upgrade just by one version or something along those lines. And I always, in this case, put the version in the subject as well as in the version field. That is so that anytime you actually take your file, when you go to the properties of that file, you can actually go to the details tab here, and right there is your subject, so you can see it very plainly as to what the what version this installer is, because the version number, albeit to Microsoft's attempt, it does not actually show in here anywhere. So I put it in the subject field to ensure that that version number is published onto the file so that you can see it easily. And then the common version number that's shared among all the DLLs and executables is right here on a shared global assembly CS file. And all you have to do is update your version numbers here, and then you should be good to go to roll that and release a product. So again, that's all just utilizing our existing keys. So if you wanted to break from potentially overlapping between our service and your own, you know, if you want to rename the actual service or things along those lines, then you can actually do that out here in there is a designer file here for the record link service. And this is just a Microsoft integration point. And you can come in here and manage the settings for that and change the properties for the name of the service and so on as to how that will actually get deployed as on the system. So up to you to be able to fully customize it if you want. Of course, any changes or deviations from that as we produce updates may have conflicts. So you'd have to resolve those on your own for any derived repositories or otherwise. So you know, take that at your own discretion. But in any case, that's how we intend that to correctly work.
Great. And so as they're getting updates, they'll just have to run through those additional changes. And how often do you think, you know, we're going to be making updates, or, you know, what's the iteration on that have you kind of found?
Well, it depends on whether we're in active development for something brand new or not. I mean, the current history dictates that it is still updated pretty often for each release, but it just highly depends upon what the actual what feature it is you're trying to adapt and pull into your project. So there are constant bug fixes that are always posted and put into the history for the project. So if you want those, you can take them whenever you're ready to take them on your side. But that said, if you create a derivative repository, that should be pretty easy to maintain. You only pull from the parent anytime you want to pull the latest updates. And if you've got your own customizations, obviously you'll have to merge those. But the overall you know, integration point and, you know, giving you a basis to start is a very large portion of this project and what it's intended to help you with.
Great. All right. So any other questions from the guys on the call? I know questions will come up as and maybe we need to do some one-on-one time to help hold your hand a little bit through some of these some of this integration stuff. You guys are great. Getting a great piece of code for a very low price. So, you know, I hope you guys kind of appreciate what's gone into this. So I was just looking in our repository. We spent, this is at my cost, almost $99,000 on just part of it, and then another 5 and another 10. So over about $120,000 we built on this system that Martin's created. So appreciate you sharing it with us, Martin, and we'll continue to expand. And I know there's going to be other people that have questions from this video as well. So I know you're available, and just continue to stay active, everybody, on that Slack channel with Martin. And that's the best way to keep in touch and move things forward. And appreciate everybody's time. So if there's no other questions, we'll end the recording for now.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.